choppy winter in Shanghai. I hadn't been back to Shanghai for 2 years and arrived only before Christmas. I acquired the habit of walking in London, so I decided to walk to the city centre to meet a friend. Sissi and I went to the same school and shared the same bunk bed in the dormitory for 2 years. The last time I saw her was at a school reunion 3 years ago. We arranged to meet at Raffles City Shopping Mall in city centre at 6 p.m, the day before the New Year's Eve, after she finished work. The mall was situated between Nanxing Pedestrian Street and the People's Square. A few years ago, in a misty morning, I walked back from the Bund, which was not far from the People's Square. I followed the elevated highway and soon reached a light railway station. I remember 2 years ago there were a few cafes in the station, but now there was only a 24-hour KFC. A handful of shabby small restaurants were open opposite to the station. I walked across Luxing Park. The park was named after the fiction writer, editor, translator, critic, essayist, and poet Zhou Shuren, whose pen name was Lu Xing. He was a modernist in Chinese literature and a liberalist in politics. A bachelor who had been trapped in an arranged marriage for 27 years, he had a lover at the age of 49. She was his former student and assistant from Beijing. They started to live together in 1927 in Shanghai and had a son. Lu Xing died in 1936 in his flat when he was 55. It's 8 minutes walk from the park. Before I read Haruki Murakami's A Wild Sheep Chase and spent several years afterwards to read and reread all his works, I had an unprovoked interest in Lu Xing's literature. I read all his short stories, several volumes of his diaries, and his correspondence with his lover. Then I passed a demolition site on Sichuan Road. Once when my mother and I passed this place years ago, she said all the old traditional buildings would be destroyed, and shopping malls and office buildings would be built. I could see some new malls erecting amongst the relics. I remembered I took a picture here in 2008. In that picture, a red kite flies as high as a skyscraper. I felt quite warm even though it was December. My face was sticky because of the sweat and the dust in the air. I reached Fuzhou Road, lined with painting material shops and bookstores selling books by weight. Among them was Shanghai Book City, a gigantic 9-story block, looked like a library. I frequented 8th floor when I was at school to flip through the heavy hardback art books. I bought my first English novels there, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Soon I found myself at the entrance of Nanjing Pedestrian Street. The oldest and busiest pedestrian road in China was packed with tourists, beggars, and opportunists. I finally reached Raffles City, the ground floor frequently occupied by performance, promotion, or gaming installations. Just like 2 years ago, was the meeting point of the fancy-dressed youths. I successfully spotted Sissi outside one of the trendy shops in the mall. She suggested we should go to West Nanjing Road for food. When Sissi and I were walking towards the West Nanjing Road, I kept crashing into people on the narrow pedestrian path. I complained, but Sissi said, You have been away for too long and have forgotten that's the way it is. It's Shanghai. You're supposed to bump into each other roughly. It reminded me of what happened at Shanghai Pudong Airport a few days ago. I collided with someone with my suitcase. After saying sorry, in English, I realized I was in China. A minute later, I did it again, and without looking at the person, I said, "Duibutsu," sorry, in Chinese. But he rejoined me in English. Sissi had a loyalty card for a Japanese restaurant, so we went to this place on the 7th floor of another shopping mall. On the ground floor, they sold women's garment of Japanese style. This was a place with rotating belts, which circled the sushi makers. We ordered some hot dishes apart from sushi. During the meal, we exchanged gossip. It was still early after the dinner. When we left the restaurant, I saw people rushing into the underground station. "Shall we walk a little?" I suggested. "We could walk along the West Nanjing Road," Sissi said. I was surprised in Shanghai. The means of entertainment were limited apart from eating out. Most activities required group participation. Game parlors, bowling alleys, karaoke shops. Malls closed at 8 or 9. Pubs in China were for womanizers. Sissi said she fancied some dessert. We passed some dim-lighted European restaurants and saw a Japanese cake shop was still open across the road. The shop was empty, except the cashiers. The air conditioner was in full power, and I started to sweat when we ordered by the counter. We ordered cheesecakes, and I helped myself with some hot water from the coffee machine, as no one was there to help. It was too hot after 20 minutes, and we left. Before taking the underground trains, we bought warm milk tea from a pop-up store outside the People's Park. We arranged to meet again in a few days after the New Year. Sissi and I met for lunch 3 weeks later, the day before I flew back to London. It was 2 weeks before the Chinese New Year. Sissi was working at the Municipal Psychology Centre as an apprentice doctor. It was her 6th year at the medical school. We met at the nearest underground station to the hospital. Sissi looked very cheerful when I saw her. She said because of this meeting, she could have a longer lunch break. There was a shopping mall 5 minutes walk from the station. We walked through the underground passage to the mall. Then we walked up to the 3rd floor where we could find most of the restaurants. The indoor cafes had tables and chairs fixed to the ground. Few people were sitting there. I noticed that a Taiwanese chain restaurant opened a branch on the 2nd floor. I felt like eating their Japanese hot pot, so we went. I had never been in this branch before. Some men in suits were sitting by a table at the higher level, smoking. A mother with her parents and child were sitting next to us. The child screamed and ran back and forth in the corridor. The mother and grandmother kept talking between themselves and disregarded the child. The restaurant had large windows facing the street, while many other branches did not. It reminded me of hotels that had central air-conditioned rooms without windows. Some people were willing to take these rooms for lower rates. We ordered some fried snacks, a salad with orange-flavored dressing, and some hot dishes, but we did not have Japanese hot pot. After the lunch, I walked Sissi back to the psychology center. It was a sunny winter afternoon. The air was chilly, but it was not windy. We crossed the street to the sunny side of the pedestrian path. This side of the street had a row of 6-story flats built in 1970s. Hung on the iron-barred gates were coloured, usually green, iron letterboxes with flat numbers. Each flat in the building had a pigeonhole in the box. An elderly man in greasy, thick cotton wadded jacket and trousers was sound asleep in front of one of those iron gates. He half lay on an armchair, his legs dangling on the back of another. I did not know how he kept still in his awkward position. He was wearing a pair of dirty and bare-worn trainers. His mouth was slightly open. His face was tawdry, his deep wrinkles crawling around his eyes and on his forehead. It seemed that he had been working outdoors all his life. Now he was sound asleep under the warm winter sun on a Friday afternoon by the pedestrian path in an anonymous street in Shanghai. I passed him, then I walked back and took a photograph of him. Sissi said my action of taking a photograph of a sleeping man reminded her of her patients. Then she described me some of the cases she had heard about in the centre. One patient was a girl about 13 years old. She said she could see little people and hear them talking to her. Some little people said, "You are a good girl, you are beautiful, clever, and everybody likes you." Some said, "You are a bad girl, you are lazy and stupid, you are useless in this world, why don't you die?" One little person proposed to her. But what did she know about marriage? She started to panic. Then Sissi told me a story which was about a young man. One day, this young man felt all his bones were gone. He tried to touch his face, but he could not, because without bones he couldn't lift his arms. "Where are my bones?" he thought. He felt pain. Is this the pain from the body, or is this the pain from the feeling of loss? I accompanied Sissi to the front gate of the centre. The main reception was in a building with engraved facade, but Sissi told me that she worked in one of the tall modern buildings at the back, where all the wardens were. "You could not see them from here," she said. Them, she meant the patients. It was time that she needed to go back to work, so we said goodbye. We agreed to keep in touch. I would meet as soon as I came back to Shanghai next time.